All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited. We have a lot of amazing speakers, and we're just going to get started with a really quick couple of things for housekeeping. So, first things first, we are Ladies at UX Seattle. And if you haven't attended any of our events or heard of us before, we're a global group of UX designers and researchers with over 50 local chapters across various cities worldwide. The events and meetups that we organize are to facilitate networking, collaboration, and growth. And although we are women focused, we welcome everyone to attend our events. We also have an active Slack channel where we're going to be sharing resources that are mentioned today after the event, and where you can start chatting a little bit more to the people that you've met today. We're going to actually post a link to the Slack channel in the chat, so please look out for that. And then just a really quick overview of our housekeeping rules. This event is going to be recorded, so you should see a little red recording button at the top. We're going to post this on our YouTube channel, so if you're unable to see everything, then you can watch it later. Feel free to keep your camera on so we can see all of your amazing faces, but please keep yourself muted and remain muted until we go into breakout rooms. It's also important for us to tell you that this is a safe space, whether we're offline or online. So if you can, take a look at our code of conduct, which you can find on our website. The short version is we don't tolerate any forms of harassment at our events. And if you need to reach out to any of the organizers, please use the chat to let us know if we can help you in any ways. All right, I'm going to leave it to Yila to introduce our speakers and the rest of our amazing event. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Rosie. And would you mind share your screen again with the slide? And while you're doing that, hi everyone, my name is Ela. I am a master's student at the University of Washington Human Centered Design Engineering program right now. We also have Lexus, Rosie, Carrie, and Fonan from the event planning committee. And for tonight's event, we are going to have a short intro, like Rosie just did it, then the panel discussion, and then we will break into 4 rooms to have the further direct discussion with the speakers on the topic that you are most interested in. And then we will come back to the main room to close things out. That is most of it for the agenda tonight. So now, without any further ado, let me introduce our amazing panelists. It is our honor to have Chad, Courtney, Damien, and Jada to be with us tonight. How about each of you give us a quick intro about who you are, what you are doing for work, and how did you get into this field? Let's start with Chad.
Hey, I hope you can hear me. My name's Chad Ruprecht, and for the last couple of months, I've been working on this couch, but I used to work at Microsoft when the campus was open. I've been working at Microsoft for about 4 years, and I've been working in augmented and mixed reality for most of that time. I've done things in the consumer space, and I've done things in the enterprise space, especially lately. As it says there, I'm a UX researcher, so I work closely with design teams, with PM teams. And what's really interesting is the interesting part of my job is I get to really figure out, like, where is mixed reality going? Where is it actually going to work? So a lot of my research is where the rubber hits the road. It's how is this technology actually going to work for the customer? And how are we going to get this solution all the way through? So those are some things that I deal with on a daily basis. And I love doing what I do. I also look at computer vision, which is another kind of emerging technology, looking at different image recognition and recognizing people, and how we can take that data and put that back into mixed reality using the headset. So the device that I work with the most is the HoloLens. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I got into the field through the route some people take of psychology. So I did a psychology PhD to get into this field. And I really love UX. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then Courtney.
Hey everyone, so nice to be here. Really excited for tonight and to be among these other panelists. I am a senior UX designer on Amazon. I've been at Amazon for almost 7 years now. I've been focusing on Alexa for the last 3 years, where I worked on enterprise Alexa smart properties and have moved over recently to focus on multimodal design. What I mean by multimodal design is Alexa devices with screen and voice design. So pairing the visual with voice to create amazing experiences. And I really got into UX design by being a fine artist and applying digital experiences to fine art and illustration. So you'll find me sketching most of my designs out first before anything comes to life. Really excited to be here again. Looking forward to chatting with all of you.
Thank you. And next, Damien.
Hi, everyone. My name is Damien. I'm a consultant at DVUI. That's my own consultancy. Until recently, I worked at Amazon. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Washington, where I teach voice user interface design, as well as general human-centered design. How did I get into UX? I actually studied linguistics, and my whole career I have worked in speech technology one way or another. So most recently worked at Amazon, but I actually started as a linguist working on bigger and bigger pieces of customer experiences for a company called Nuance. That's a leader in the voice space. And finally, when that Alexa thing happened, I came over to Amazon. But so I focus primarily on voice experiences, and really how the world is changing now. And like, even with this panel, you can see it's pretty obvious that adding voice to just about any experience, any device in any context, is where things are going now. That didn't used to be the case, because I have worked here in this industry for nearly 20 years. And the new world is very exciting. And so glad to be here, and glad to be a part of this with all these great panelists.
Thank you, Damien. And then last but not least, Jada.
Hi, my name is Jada Williams. I am a UX designer. I've been doing UX design for about, over 15 years at least. About 3.5 years ago, I got into AR, VR, XR, MR, whatever you want to call it. I got a job at Microsoft on the Hollands team, and I've worked on a number of projects there. I worked on some enterprise stuff. I built an app called Layout, launched that. That was an AR and a VR app. Worked on some Hollands enterprise solutions. Worked on Power MR that had some mobile components, so using mobile AR. And then I also, before I left, joined the IVAS team, which was working with the military and creating Hollands for them and training soldiers. I recently, in the last month, started a new job. I'm now over at Axon, where I get to work on some really cool trainings where I'm working with law enforcement and empathy training and coping, and just really how to utilize VR in a medium that's not gaming. So I'm very excited about that. How did I get into the field? So I've been in UX for a while, and I think I might be like some of you. Basically, about 4 years ago, I was at this really fun startup. It was awesome. And then they laid off about a third of the company. So I was in layoffs, which maybe some of you guys are going through right now. And I really had to think about what I wanted to do moving forward. I was sitting in interviews and they would ask me, why do you want to work here? And I was thinking, I don't want to work here. And I really wanted to explore what else was out there. And I started going to a bunch of meetups, and I stumbled upon a VR one. And then I just kind of fell in love with it, got a VR headset, started to learn some stuff. And 6 months later, got a job at Microsoft. And that's me in a nutshell.
That's great. Okay, so now we have a basic background about who you are, and then let's now jumping into the XR and voice design. So the first question I'm going to ask, maybe Jada, you can tell me about what is AR and VR actually?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a number of different names. There's some people call it XR. I don't even know if they agree on what X means. Sometimes it's cross, sometimes it's extended reality. Microsoft likes to call it mixed reality. Essentially, it's AR and VR. So AR is augmented reality and VR is virtual reality. And augmented reality is just layering things on top of your reality. And I think of AR and VR as a spectrum, like mixed reality. XR is a spectrum. It starts with AR, where you're just layering stuff on top of your reality to the point that there's so much stuff layered on it that you're completely immersed and that's virtual reality. So it's a spectrum of levels. There's lots of different devices. There's lots of different ways you can dabble in AR and VR. I almost want to like ask Chad to add to his level of what he believes mixed reality is. But I mean, the fun part is there's so many different ways you can get into mixed reality. There's a lot of different devices you can use. It's not just one thing. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on the web, depending on different aspects of it. You can on a tablet. You can get the glasses. You can get fully immersed in VR. So there's a lot of different realities that we work in. And I think the biggest thing with mixed reality is that it's not just a 2D space. You're dealing with 3 dimensions. So there's a lot of thinking and design around the 3-dimensional. And I think there's a question later about that. So I won't dive too deep into that right now.
Do you have anything to add, Chad? And also, can you also talk a little bit about what isn't AR and VR? That's trickier, so I want to leave it to you, Chad.
No, I actually agree with you. I think that we were told that at Microsoft, right? It's a complete spectrum, which really doesn't describe anything because it's like, it's everything. So that's just, it's in and out. But yeah, no, it's a complete spectrum. But what's interesting, I think to add to it is the things that you can do with it change quite a bit though. So even though it is a smoothly sliding spectrum, you can do a lot of different things when you're adding things to the experience. So like VR, there's a lot coming at you, right? Whereas AR, you're putting small things on top of the environment. So you can do a lot of little select things, right? There's little things that you can kind of change and twist. And so I would say that, even though the distinctions are kind of squishy, there's quite a bit of difference to them when you actually do things with them. What was your second question? I didn't hear that last part.
So there are a lot of like misbelieving about like XR, and if you want to talk a little bit about like maybe there are some of the things that people believe that AR or VR can do, but they are actually nothing to do with AR or VR.
It's like myths. I mean, there's a lot of, I'll just say this, there's a lot of things that we uncover with research where you didn't need mixed reality. You didn't need AR. Like people love paper. That was one thing that I learned a lot when I would go out to site visits. Like paper's pretty awesome. You can write stuff down on it and you can stick it on a wall and you've got it right there. You can see who's penned it on it. So it's not a cure-all for all the problems. And in many cases, it's a lot of work, as Jada would know. It's a lot of work to implement those things, to actually get it to work in context and have it like read out the right things. It can often be the wrong choice. So a lot of my job was showing that with research that this is not a great choice, or this is something you should actually convert into mixed reality. So yeah.
Okay. How about voice design, Damien?
Well, I was actually just thinking as Chad was talking that the question why voice is actually the one that designers will most often ask a product manager or a VP or whoever you're working with. And they're like, well, I mean, obviously we have to have voice. And the answer is usually like, but it's really hard to do and it's really expensive and it's really hard to get right. So we really need to answer this question is how are we solving this problem and why is this the best way to do it? So especially for the relative complexity of things that I can imagine that mixed reality and AR and VR are a very similar thing where if you are using things that are extensions of people's perceptions that they actually don't know how to consciously control or process, which is the case for voice, or for many aspects of voice design, you may want to reconsider some choices when you consider the emotional load or the cognitive load of having to do certain things at the same time that you are using a voice interface to say, give a response or to make a selection. So that choosing wisely and that kind of research is very often what we will uncover. And so it's a kind of a weird position to be in, to often have to advocate as much for yourself as your design and your discipline having merit as to suggest that, but the thing that you want to use it for, maybe we could do something a little different, or maybe here in this other place where you haven't yet considered it and your users, indicated that this would be much easier while their hands are full, or, while they don't have to remember two things at once.
That's great.
So-
And continue.
I was just going to say, so just to summarize, like really thinking about like what the cognitive implications of it are, and trying to be like very user centered in that aspect, I think is one of the ways that a voice designer brings value to projects, and that those aspects, as Chad was suggesting, often aren't obvious.
Mm-hmm. And then what about your definition, Courtney?
Yeah, to add on to that, I think really importantly, spatial awareness, knowing where you're applying voice, whether it's on a TV or an Alexa device or through AR, VR, XR, knowing where it's being used is super important, because there can be a lot of confusion around sounds around you, seeing things around you, what's interruptive or what's disruptive to you or to the people using your experiences. So being very aware of where your customers are in space, whether that's in a 3D space or a physical space, is really important when you're executing these things.
Sounds good. I think you guys are already touching on our second question. So the second one, I'm going to ask, what are some of the differences or challenges when designing or researching for the 3D spaces? How's that like different with the 2D design? So I want to start this question with Chad. How's the research different for you?
Yeah, on the research side, it is about the context in which you're going to implement the solution. And so this was really easy. Before COVID, we would actually go out to the environments we were going to deploy in, and we would come back with these huge site visit reports showing like, things that you wouldn't think were a problem, like everything's made out of reflective metal. And so putting 3D objects in there can be really hard, because she probably remembers that. Yeah, like that was a big problem. So with 3D, you're looking, the challenges of research are just to show that it's going to be able to easily be implemented in 3D. And there's just so many more things that can screw it up in 3D. People walking through it, it getting stuck in the walls. So like coming into poking out through a wall, that happened a lot. So it's just more constraints, more things the laundry list grows of all the things that potentially could be a problem. And then the last thing I think too is there's a lot of human perception issues with 3D. So the way in which you draw, it's you're not always sure exactly how someone's seeing something because they're seeing it from different angles. So that's another thing to consider with research is, I think when I was designing a test, I would want to make sure that I got people looking at the artifact, like the hologram, at lots of different angles. Because 3D adds those kind of problems with, I think it's like visual parallax or something, but there's a lot of things that can happen depending on where the object is placed and how far away it is from you. And as it gets farther away, things can happen. So that's the research side.
Mm-hmm. How about the design side, Jada?
From the design side, I think it's similar in the respect that 3D to 2D, everything that you're already doing 2D, you're now adding an additional dimension. So you got to keep all the 2D stuff, and then you got to think of some additional 3D stuff. And some of those are, one of the things I thought immediately when I joined this space was the spatial design, or the spatial audio and audio design is a big element of MR and AR. There's a lot of affordances you lose that audio adds. It can add directional things. I mean, there's haptics that you're losing, some touch. So it allows for these feedback loop things that you're kind of able to not have from some of the other things. So spatial audio is like a huge thing, and having audio designers around at Microsoft was awesome to learn a lot about that. I think the other thing to think about was ergonomics of just like your body and the things that sometimes you have to do. You'll either have to hold this thing up if you're working on a tablet or a phone for a long period of time. That can be draining on anything you hold. Anytime you hold your hands over your heart, it's very tiring. Anytime you put something on your head, that's going to add some strain on your neck. So if you look down a lot, you have to really think about where they're looking and how long they're going to have this on their head for. So the ergonomics of body and gestures is really important, that I really never thought about before. And then I think the other thing about it is like spatial environment. So understanding, which was probably a little bit about the voice stuff, is understanding where you are in space, the things that are around you in space, how to navigate through spatial areas and environments is something that I never really thought about in 2D. So those are some of the main things that I thought when I went from 2D to 3D that I'd never really thought about that kind of come out in AR and XR.
I think you also talk about the spatial things during our lecture, Damien. Do you want to talk about the voice design and how's that different from the 2D design?
So a lot of what Jada and Chad have touched on, I think, figure in a very similar way. So Jada, actually talking about what you just were, and Courtney, I know you know this very well from what you used to focus on, is that the context of use is so critical for voice design, because we think that we can control what we're saying, and we think that we can decide what we're understanding. But it turns out that our use of language is so instinctual and so outside of our conscious control that it turns out that it's very difficult to just answer when you're doing something that you've never done before. And that might not be obvious, like asking an object to play a song might seem like a really easy thing to do, except you've never asked an object to do anything in your life. So understanding that takes some acclimation, and that takes some getting used to what the interaction mode might be. And even that, like right now, I see people on the call moving around, and I see people making eye contact, and I see people, like, I can tell what people are doing by where their heads are positioned, but this object is never going to do that. And so if it's going to flash lights at me to tell me that it's listening, or it's going to flash lights to show me that it's talking and that I shouldn't talk, I have to learn that entire interaction model, despite the fact that I know how to talk and I can understand when this thing talks to me. And so adding that to any experience as well, the situational experience of having to figure out why this thing in a hotel is talking to me, or how do I respond when I heard the voice from behind me when I'm wearing this headset, turns out to be a rather difficult thing for most people most of the time. And building around that and building that context in so that the user has the chance to learn how to use the interface turns out to be one of the challenges that we face all the time.
And Courtney, you have anything crazy to share?
Two challenges. I did do a stint in XR over at Amazon, and what I found to be super challenging was latency with hardware, especially in VR. What I found is the technical limitations and challenges will provide design challenges itself, even with voice design and dealing with the hardware that you have to work with. Right, with NLU, like natural language understanding, how we interpret language from humans, how we can deliver feedback to people, whether it's sound or visuals or voice, in a way that feels humanistic. We have these challenges with the hardware that's being developed. So if you're a hardware designer and engineer, kudos to you, because that's a whole nother ballgame of designing stuff that needs to work with what we're designing experiences for. And the other piece is really just knowing, like, information overload. As a designer who designs for screen and for voice at the same time, how do I know when to show something on screen versus have Alexa say something? How do I know not to overload them with too much information? If you're spouting off lists, let's say, how much are they going to remember? And so there's just challenges with what different people can handle, and different types of signals that you're giving them at one time.
That's great. I think I also see some question coming in the chat, but just so you know that we're not sure if we will have time after the panel discussion to have the Q&A, but if we are not getting to your question, feel free to ask the panelists when you are in their room. So no worry about that. Okay, so I think we also lightly touch on this already, but what are some of the tools you use for your work? Like, people often think about voice design or XR, thinking about those very cool devices. Are you also really interacting with those kind of devices on a daily basis? Can we start with Courtney?
Yeah, I probably have maybe 8 Alexas, at different times going. But my favorite tool to use, and definitely it's testing on these devices to make sure that the experiences are great, But having conversation is my best tool. Talking to people, listening how people interact to create most natural responses in my design. And if I can say things out loud or talk and have a conversation with someone and hear how that person responds in return, whether it's volume of voice or inflection of voice or tone or the words they're using to respond to me, is the things that I pick up and I bring into my design. So just talking and hearing and listening is the biggest tool that I use.
How about Damien?
So you gotta love the voice designers who will like make it lo-fi and be like, I love that what you just said, Courtney, because I was going to say this is the most important tool that I have. Because really just writing things down, and then subsequently, so the levels of prototyping that you do for voice design aren't necessarily obvious, because writing something down is the first step. And then even figuring out that it might be more difficult than you think to capture this idea. And then considering that you might only have 1.5 to 2 seconds to really have the user's attention, because often people will only listen to the beginning of a statement. And then saying it out loud to myself and realizing that it's a little bit awkward because there's a whole bunch of consonants all together, or there's many different regional pronunciations of this word that mean that people say it a different way and they're going to understand it a different way. But the TTS voice that is going to speak it is only going to say it one way. And so then the next thing that I do is I try saying it out loud as a conversation with Courtney. And then when her response comes, I realize that this whole conversation that I'm trying to create feels stilted and strange. But once we feel a little better about it, we bring a couple more people in and get more feedback. And so like it's not obvious that you might have 100 prototypes when you're doing voice design, but it turns out that it's also very easy to have many, many versions while you're just working with these tools. And not sweating the pixel pushing, as we might call it, with like exactly how does it sound, or how do I change the tone, or how do I lengthen this word to add emphasis. That turns out to be much less important for the most of the design that you do as a voice designer.
Yeah, I remember you showed us like how you do prototype for voice design and really just like typing out the conversation. It's not really like something very fancy, but still very important. Okay, how about the XR, Jada?
Yeah, so unfortunately, they have not invented the Figma of VR yet. So you have like a ton of tools. You have your 2D tools as well as your 3D tools. So I suggest anyone who is interested in this field become somewhat familiar with some of the game engines out there. So whether that's Unity, Unreal, there's a myriad of like low code ones. Amazon says Sumerian, I think like Spark. There's a new one out there called Metaverse. So there's a bunch of different engines that you can learn to kind of, and that's like you're on a 2D screen playing around with things. And then, and then Adobe has a new one out as well. So Arrow is a tool that you can use not only on your phone, but desktop. But the thing I really suggest using, I'm a very big advocate for designing 3D spaces in 3D. It's going to give you a much better understanding of building something in 3D on 2D, gives you one perspective, but then you also have to jump into that to see how it'll look down the road. You can have an idea of like, oh, it's on 2D, you have like this great layout, but then when you jump into headset it just looks different. So you definitely, I love the tools that allow you to design 3D in 3D. So there's a couple of tools. Microsoft has Maquette, which I love. There's another one called Tabori. There's a number of different tools. I think like you can always do Tilt Brush, and Google Blocks is these like really basic ones as well. But just getting in device, I think, is the biggest thing when you're designing something to see how it really feels. Because you can do a whole bunch of stuff in 2D and when you're working on your computer, that's 2D. So you really have to get into the device or whatever you're projecting on to see if it really works the way you thought it did or the way it did on your screen.
Mm-hmm. And then, are you doing anything crazy for the research, Chad?
Well, we used to just get the builds on the devices. So you would get a HoloLens with the build no matter what it was created on, and then you would just test it there. With COVID, that's just all gone. So we're at like it got really stuck. We were even joking that we were going to ship HoloLenses to people in boxes and then have them just open it up and put it on and test it in their apartment and then hope that they would send it back, but they probably wouldn't. But yeah, we're really kind of stuck right now. And so I honestly use for research, I use user testing a lot. And there's not a good workaround for AR VR. So a lot of that it's like if you have a customer, maybe you can work with them because they've already got a device and you can send them something. But it's very challenging in COVID to do the testing for AR VR right now because it's actual devices, and you're putting it on your face during a virus, and that's just not the best idea. So.
Yeah, I can see the challenge. You can ask Rosie to be a participant. She promised she will send it back. Yeah. Okay. So next question. What are the best practices or like the next trend that you see in the XR design or XR research field? Maybe starting with Chad.
For XR research, I think, hopefully we get through the virus. That's the first step. Then actually, I do think that that's going to become more common. I think that you would actually send builds out to people who have the devices and have them test those devices. So user testing, if you've used that before now, they have a module for people to download apps on mobile and test the mobile app while they're doing everything else. So I would see that that's probably coming down the line for devices as well. But yeah, it's going to be just wider adoption of the devices themselves and then pushing tests to those devices in order to test it. In terms of research, though, like for XR and AR, it doesn't necessarily change. You use the same principles that you'd use to test anything. You're doing usability testing or you're doing some cognitive, walkthrough. Nothing changes in AR, VR necessarily. It's just a different medium. So that's the future, is just more of the same, but with better devices.
Yeah. Okay. Jada, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID has changed the trajectory of AR and XR a little bit more than it would have if you had predicted in January 2020 what was going to happen at the end of this year. So I think COVID has pushed people more to understand we can't all get together in large rooms and large conferences anymore. So a lot of conferences have gone online. There's even Burning Man was in VR this year and alt space. So that was like one way to kind of figure out how do we get these experiences that we used to have all together, but in a safe space. And so we saw like alt space, like numbers of usage just shoot up as COVID started to go into it. And I think also with a lot of the distance learning and understanding that people are learning from home, and how do we utilize these devices to kind of help with some of those, because it can be very difficult just doing Zooms all day, and how to do different learnings. So teaching and education, I think, has been pushed further this year too, with some of those, with just as a result of COVID.
Mm-hmm. I think COVID definitely gonna be something that changed the world entirely and then permanently. And how about what are some of the next trend you see in voice design, Damien?
So one thing that I think is interesting, what's happening right now is the UXification of voice. So it used to be back in the battle days when I started that every voice designer kind of did everything, and the people that really had extreme specializations tended to be audio engineers, sound designers. And that tended to be people who already had backgrounds as musicians, recording engineers, and so on. And so there was this basic split of do voice design, do everything else. And so what that meant, voice designers had to be researchers. It meant that if there was visual mockups to do because there was going to be a chatbot with visuals, then you had to figure that out. It also meant that all of the things about personas and customer service research, and whether it's going to a call center and interviewing managers and people who are taking calls to really understand who the customers are, because you would be working for a bank or a telco, a telecommunications company, and wouldn't necessarily by contract even have access to their actual customers. You need to know these ways to learn about things. And now with the relative ease and the relative ability of UX designers to do certain things. People are focusing on marketing. People are focusing on a specific space and saying, I'm a fintech designer. I only do fintech chatbots. That is a thing that I never would have imagined even in 2016, even 2018. It seemed kind of silly for people to focus so extremely. And now I feel like maybe it's a really great time to say, you know what? I'm a voice design researcher because it's a hard thing to do and it's time consuming, and I can add a lot of value with this thing that I care about. And the tools that I already have from my training doing a PhD in anthropology, or from when I was a visual artist and I had to do critiques and I had to run the studio, that allowed me to glean all kinds of insights from how people were doing certain things. And so the ability of people to focus is not a thing that I even imagined a very short time ago. But now if you want to focus on multimodal design, but more on the visual aspect, or if you want to be an XR designer, but you want to focus more on the voice aspect, I feel like there's opportunities now that maybe weren't as obvious a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. And anything you want to add, Courtney?
Yeah, I think Damien said it best when we started this chat, which was 2020. It's kind of put us in this position where I think businesses and companies and they're realizing the need for voice. So the demand of voice as a medium is becoming more of demand. It was back when UX became like the hot buzz job to have, and still is, right? People are like, I need a UX designer. I don't know really what it is, but I need it. That's kind of how voice is right now. It's like, we know that voice is a great medium. It's a way to communicate even. And now the end of 2020 is near, and people are like, wow, this is a great way to communicate. And if we do this properly, people are going to want to engage with our products and our services. And so, yeah, I think where it is just the beginning. And to touch on Damien's piece, it's exactly what happened to me, where I was a UX designer, and then now I've moved into this multimodal design where I can do visual and voice. So it's getting more granular and more very specific. So if you guys have a niche or an area that you guys really love or very passionate about, there's ways to fit it into design, whether it's voice design or XR design. You can find ways to do that in your jobs and find value for yourself with your company. So, yeah.
That's great. So our next question will be, I think we see a lot of students in our attendees. How about if there's any people, like junior people like me, trying to get into the XR or like voice design field? What would be some of the advices you would give them, like to trying to get started here? Maybe starting with Courtney.
Oh man. I think getting started in this, you guys are in the right place right now. Finding more about the field if you're interested in it, and networking and talking to folks who work in the field is really, really great. So networking has always been something for me that's worked really well. And I can learn more about the field I'm interested in going into. Also, if you're wanting to, find a job, and you're not sure your portfolio is ready, or you're not sure if your work is there, or maybe you don't have enough voice examples, give yourself a project or find a project, and you can work with a mentor even. You can reach out to, I'm sure, people in the fields that be willing to mentor and work on a project with them to give or showcase a way that you can design, do a voice design example for your portfolio, and just show that your interest and your passion just to dig into the space is there. A lot of times when I'm hiring people, I look for that passion or the interest or the learn and be curious, or the area where I'm like, I know this person is going to give me their all because they're interested and they're willing to work for it. So I think just going out there and trying to put yourself forward and give an example is one of the ways I've done it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I think there are a lot of like resources out there very specific about like voice design or XR, and then it could be hard for people to like learn about it sometime. Any advices from you, Damien?
So I would agree with you about tools and learning what you do in the industry or in the trade, and yet understanding the user's perspective and understanding how the devices themselves work. I'm talking about voice design. a $3,000 headset. I don't have one, but if anyone wants to send one to me, I'll take it. But you can, I've got Alexa devices surrounding me. I've got, even if all you have is your phone, if it's a Google or Apple device, has a voice assistant built in. It's also got a different one if it's a Samsung device. And when you use that device, if you use it again and again, and you ask the weather again and again in 100 different ways, and you start to understand that it understands language in a certain way, and you start to figure out what patterns you can trigger things with your voice by saying certain things that aren't exactly right. And you start to see the limits of what the device can do and not do. That's the kind of thing that when we're hiring voice designers, that we can tell how interested you are, because you really have like pushed the devices that you have to the limit, and you understand the edges of what the designs can do. And so that you have already started to figure out how to do voice design by kind of breaking the designs that currently exist. So I would highly recommend get a Google device, get an Alexa device, and talk to it all the time. See what's weird when it responds in the wrong way, and try to figure out why it's weird. Did it understand it, like what you said, as a music request? Why did it do that? Oh, wait a minute. What's this concept of entities? And then you're Googling, and then with your mentors or your peers that you're doing meetups with, you're like, hey, so I just learned about this thing, entity recognition. That's super weird. Check this out. Now you're the de facto expert in your learning, among your learning peers, and you can share that enthusiasm in this weird stuff, because much of what we do, we take it for granted that it's not weird because we do it for a job, but it's actually really weird to break things down to their basic concepts. Like, how do people understand what's coming at them by using their eyes and their ears and their hands, or, what have you? Really understanding that at a detailed level isn't something that you have to do in everyday life or even as a user. And so when you can show that you know some of those things and you've been paying attention, that's a sign that you're thinking about it in the way that a designer would.
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle. I think like for every time when I interact with my phone, and like when Siri cannot understand what I'm saying, or just like forget it, I'll just type it out. I should really like try more times to see like how I can make it work. Okay, what about the XR design, Jada?
The biggest piece of advice I can give is just to get into it. It doesn't mean you have to buy a $3,000 headset, but most people have at least a smartphone that's AR capable. If not, the VR headsets are also becoming much more, Christmas is around the corner. So I suggest maybe getting one of those or asking Santa. But the reality is no one's going to hire you to do something that you've never actually done yourself. So you need to make sure that you are getting into the experiences, seeing the patterns that already exist. I mean, AR and XR, it's a little bit of the wild, wild west. There's certain things that come from mobile, so have existing patterns or mental models that people are familiar with. But then there's other elements that someone's like, how do you do this? And you're like, I don't know. And you just got to play around with it and figure it out yourself. And you're not going to be able to do that if you don't understand what's already out there and how things work right now, how the controllers work, how the hands work, gestures, articulated hands, voice. There's so many different ways to navigate using XR. So you really have to understand all of those things by doing it. And then the other suggestion I have is just read everything you can read. I mean, there's like we even explained, there's AR, there's XR, there's VR. A lot of it has to do with like how your eyes work, about, there's so many different areas that these things affect. If you're an architect, that kind of overlaps. If you've done like game design, that overlaps. If you've done theater, that overlaps. There's so many different areas that this touches. So there's so much to learn. So I think when I first got into this, I just like consumed every blog, every like article that I could to try to get as much knowledge in as I could. And then do, again, like these guys are saying, you got to do the work. So try to put in a side project, do a hackathon, do some of the actual tutorials that you find online so that you're understanding how it works from behind the scenes as well.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. And how about the research side, Chad?
I think research is a little different than design, in the sense that you can't just identify like, oh, I need to cram and learn Unity, over the next couple of weeks or something. Well, I don't know how long. That probably takes much longer than that.
Much longer.
Yeah. Sorry. But what I've seen is that, well, I'll just tell you what happened to me. Like, I took a gig working on a music app that Microsoft canceled, and then I got into XR because they canceled it. There was no magical story. Just like I just moved to the next thing. So sometimes I think you just have to take gigs, and then you eventually get there. You find the gigs within the company that you're at or the place that you're at. I'd say the only exception with research might be that if you have a master degree or a PhD or even a bachelor's degree, but it's in some kind of, like, maybe you had like an honors thesis that was on VR or AR, that's like a flag that says, hey, I did something there. That tends to help out, I think, quite a bit. But yeah, I think research is a little different. And because, like, again, research is more universal. You have these methods that we use that we apply across different domains. And so, yeah, I think that's the one way. If you have time, do something that kind of relates to XR and VR and sell that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and then follow up on this question, what about, like, is there any resources that you use yourself to keep up in this field? Like, Damien, do you use any resources to keep you up with the voice design field?
I mean, so I can share some links, but there's not any super great sources that aren't highly commercial for like what's going on in the industry. But on the other hand, I am on every single mailing list for every single company that has a voice product, company that has a voice tool, company that hires voice designers, company that hires companies who hire voice designers, and so on. As well as every AI and ML list, every single thing that is related to computers doing anything automatically, basically. So that's one. I don't necessarily read everything, but, like, say, as recently as yesterday, I was deep in the tweet storm that is surrounding the firing of Google's AI, one of Google's primary AI researchers, and understanding like how that work connects to the work that I do. For reading stuff that's published, it's actually super easy to read virtually everything that has ever been published about capital V voice design. And often those books seem like they're out of date, and easy to get on Amazon or, Better World Books or something like that for like $4. So consuming the entire past history of voice design will give you a really good view of what's going on now, because the actual mechanics of how you understand language with a computer and how you create the ability of understanding things that people say from a broad range of everything that everyone can say, that actually hasn't changed very much. And so understanding the core techniques of what is a grammar, what is an entity, what is an intent, and how does TTS work? What is a phoneme? That goes a long way, and that information is actually super accessible. It's not accessible to understand, but it's accessible to get your hands on and like get a book on elementary linguistics or any of the recent voice design books that have been published.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Any resources you use, Courtney?
Plus one to Damien, really. I mean, I read a lot. So how I organize my day is in the morning when I get up after I do my like walk the dogs and run and do all that fun stuff in the morning, I sit down and read. And I read a couple of things. Like I'll read Morning Brew, which is one of my favorite mailing lists that tells me a little bit about everything, whether it's finance or health or anything. Just general world knowledge is always good to get your brain like stimulated. And then I have, Medium, and there's like a bunch of other mailing lists that I joined, and I'm happy to share all those links with you. But just reading in the morning just to get my brain going and like hearing what's going on in the world and staying current with tech are just great things that I like to do. And then having conversations with other designers is always fun. Like I might not read everything Damien reads or Jada reads, or Chad reads. Like we can talk and have a conversation, and we can share information, which is always great. So talking amongst yourselves and your peers and your mentors and instructors are great ways to just get general knowledge and learn what upcoming things are happening.
Mm-hmm. And then Chad, I'm interested to know, like, will you also consume some of those like more like academic resources, or like those industries more applicable to you? What's your take on this?
I use Google Scholar, and I'll go into those. We do a lot of research at Microsoft. We do a lot of kind of like lit reviews and foundational research. And so what we're trying to do there is we're trying to like gather up a lot of academic research or industry research, and then relate that to like the tactical problems that the teams are facing. So with the product, with like concepts that they're having, issues with. So I do some of that. At Microsoft, we're unique too that we have a big database of all the research that's been done. And the hits, yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I've got a hits duffel bag. Yeah. Hits is where all the research goes. And so I'm kind of weird. I get on that kind of like morning brew style every morning, and I read the reports that other people have done. And there's other products that are mixed reality or I just read all of them actually, because I just think it's interesting. But yeah, I read through that as well. So yeah, I'd say there's a little bit of external and a lot of internal, but I don't know how broadly that applies outside of Microsoft. I don't know if Amazon has a thing like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's what we do.
And I think, Jada, you already shared some resources that you use to keep up with the industry, but like, do you want to comment on those things that you share, or adding anything new to the list?
Yeah. I mean, the one I gave a list of like sites and stuff that I'll read for news. They're like news sites specific to XR. But I think another thing that you can do that's easy enough is just to start following some hashtags in whatever social media that you follow, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Just start. I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot. There's like VR, XR, AR, MR. So you got to get like all the R's. You can't just do one. And you'll start to see some interesting things kind of coming in that's recent, and get a sense of what's kind of going on. And then there's a couple of podcasts. When I was commuting more, I would listen to podcasts. So I think there's Voices of VR. There's the AR VR Association has a good one that comes out like once a week, where they interview a bunch of different people in the field. And then there's a local one. I think it's XR Seattle podcast that's just come out too. So there's a bunch of different resources if you want to learn more, and whatever input you get, whether it's audio, visual, there's lots of different ways to get it.
Okay, great. That would be most. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like there's one more thing I want to throw out there, that like we're all talking about things that like, hey, you should read 1,000 pages, you should follow like 1,000 hashtags and mailing lists. But for the record, I actually do the thing that Courtney does, like first thing in the morning, like reading things. But in my reading, I actually I'm a reader and a writer in my real life. And I think it's super important in one's real life to kind of have the same practices that you have in your work life, and vice versa. And so like, as someone who thinks fiction is a really important thing, and reading the voices and the experiences of people that like don't look like me, or that I can't possibly know about, I feel like that is a thing that is underrated among designers, that like reading fiction, even fiction from like the New York Times top 10 bestseller lists, I feel like is a huge asset, because the constant changing of perspective that we have during our work days, that are moving from one thing to another, that are in the context of work, you can do that, and it can seem fun, and it can actually be energizing when you're doing that, switching between one of your favorite authors, or this weird new thing that's a book that everyone at work is passing around, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with work, but it might have an influence on how you think about things, and how your perspective can be broadened.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I think that concludes our discussion section. And then, Lexus, do you want to jump in to let everybody know how the breakout room are going to work?
Yeah. So now we'll be going into the breakout rooms. If you've updated, you should be able to self-select your room now. Otherwise, I will be randomly assigning anyone who is left over. And in the main session, I will be sharing a screen that reminds everyone of what the breakout rooms are. Okay.
Hey everyone, I hope you had a great conversation. We're sorry if we cut any conversation in the middle, but we're almost there at the end of the time. And we really appreciate taking the time to join us today. So at the end, we just want to handling some of the following with the speakers. So each of the speaker, if you can share with us how you would like people to follow you, maybe on the social media, or if they can add you on LinkedIn, how they can ask any follow-up question with and have another conversation with you. How would you like that to be addressed? Damien?
Well, I kind of suck at social media, but I don't consider LinkedIn all that social. So you can connect with me there and we can figure it out from there. I have a website for my consultancy, dvui.com, and there's also damiendabrowski.com. So one way or another, one of those things, I'm also on Twitter. One of those things will have a messaging function and you can reach out to me. Anyone who's here, I will happily connect on LinkedIn.
Chat?
Yeah, mostly I do LinkedIn, and I like to boost my numbers. So
I'm going to friend you right now.
Yes, more. No, but no, I love LinkedIn, and I often do little coffee chats with people if you reach out. So yeah, please do.
Jada?
Yeah, I'm definitely more active. I kind of fell off of Twitter over the summer. It was a little too much for me. So LinkedIn's probably the safest bet. It's also safest to ask me a question. Don't just necessarily, you can follow me without asking me, but if you do want me to follow you back or whatever, asking a question is the best way for me to kind of know that you were here or that you're just not a random person who wanted to connect with me. And then, yeah, that's the best way.
And Courtney?
Yeah, I love to talk. So LinkedIn is great, but if you want to set up some time just to chat or whatever, you have a couple questions, we can set up some time together. So yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Again, like Jada, tell me why you want to talk. Otherwise, I'm happy to just chat. And I'm in Austin, Texas now. So if anyone's in Austin, I don't know, you're all in Seattle, but if you ever find yourself here, I'm happy to go for a walk and grab a coffee and hang out and just reach out if you're here.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we would just like to ask if anyone from the panelists or even from the attendees, if your company is hiring, feel free to post a message. Maybe just unmute yourself to speak up or share that in the chat. Otherwise, we are at the end of our times, and we would like to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everyone who attend today's event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was fun.
Thanks for coming.